Today. Oh, all right. Welcome to the meeting of the Education Economic Development Subcommittee. We have a robust agenda today. We start with Maryland Stadium Authority. Patrick Frank is our analyst. Mr. Frank, are you on?
Yes, I am on. Yes, I'm on. I wasn't expected to be first, but I can do that. And I'm sharing my screen now. You should be able to see it. And if everything's okay, I'll go ahead and get started then. This is the budget for the Maryland Stadium Authority. As you can see, that big red is the non-budgeted funds that does things like the Built to Learn program, the Baltimore City Schools, and then other kind of construction programs. That's really growing. And the reason that's growing is because of legislation that you enacted in recent years. The agency is essentially non-budgeted, but it does receive some state funds in order to do a lot of its work. There are some deficiencies this year. The arrangement with the Baltimore City Convention Center is that if there's an operating deficit, which there consistently is, the state pays 2/3 of the operating deficit and the city pays 1/3. The slowdown in business during the pandemic resulted in less revenues. And as a result, there were a larger operating deficit. And so there's some deficiency for that. There's also some funds for the Michael Aaron Bush, that special funds that's coming. There is an arrangement that the Hippodrome has with the state, whereby that was made a number of years ago, whereby the Hippodrome receives money from the state to help with its utilities cost, and the state gets a share of the tickets as in exchange. Well, the Hippodrome's been closed, so this arrangement has been waived by the Board of Public Works and for recent years. Probably the best table and that describes the entire agency well is this one right here, exhibit number 1. This is the pie chart, and it shows all the activities that the Stadium Authority is doing. The blue part basically is essentially bond proceeds that are being used for the construction programs that they're running. You see the supplemental schools, that's also called Built to Learn. The Baltimore City School program is still going strong, but it is winding down and they're on their last schools. There is also the Racing and Community Development Fund, and that has to do with Pimlico and Laurel Park improvements. And finally, Hagerstown. There was legislation enacted last year to give them, I think, $59.5 million of bonding paid by general funds for the new stadium there. This salmon part right here is the debt service that pays for this big blue part over here. The lighter one is state sourced. That is the general funds and special funds from lottery, education trust fund, things like that support these programs. And also the Baltimore City School arrangements is such that $20 million or 1/3 is paid of the debt service paid by the state, and $40 million or 2/3 is paid by the city and the city schools. There's also a small part here, 5%. That's what the Stadium Authority does. This is their operations, managing and maintaining the fields at Camden Yards and the Raven Stadium as well. And there's also some money for Project Core and reimbursable funds. And there also is like the Convention Center general funds I talked about here as part of that 1% in here. There's much more spending detail, which I include in the analysis, but I don't think we need to discuss that now. If you have questions about it, feel free to ask, but I'll skip over this part in the interest of time to go to the big 4 programs that they have, which is really what the analysis is about. First of all, Baltimore City School Revitalization Plan. What you see here basically is that there's very little to do anymore. There's the money is for this school here, and there's a bond sale coming up later this year, and all these last 4 here are being worked on and should be ready soon. And finally, and all this other list here is the stuff that's been done. That's going well, as I said earlier. If you look at the issuances so far, they get up to $1.1 billion, and they've only done $974 million in issuances. They've been fortunate in the market that there's been an additional $234 million in premiums that they used for the projects. What they'll do is they are planning one more sale. Here's an amortization table that shows all of their debt. The blue is the 2016, the initial. The red is the 2018. And then there's also some green and purple there. The purple one is the new sale that's coming up. There's 2 parts to the sale, essentially. The part over here under the 60 million is what they're trying to do is take advantage of the low rates that we have now. They're refunding some bonds, and then what they'll do is they'll be able to issue more debt. Normally during a refunding, you're happy because you save money, but because they can go up to the $60 million, the result of the refunding is they can do more projects. And also to do it, they've extended the program by 2 years in 2051 and 2052, and they're issuing what's called capital appreciation bonds. Basically, that's where they get, say, I think it's about 50 some million dollars, I think 58 comes to mind, that they'll get now, and then they'll make essentially 2 final payments in those last 2 years to pay off that debt. So the buyers of those bonds don't get anything for 30 years, essentially. So that's how they're extending the program and putting a little bit more money into projects. Built to Learn was enacted last year. This shows there was an initial sale of about $286 million was generated, including premiums. There is another sale planned for early in 2022. I guess the caveat here, I would say, is that they're going up to $500 million, but the Stadium Authority has told me that they will only issue as much as IAC approves for this. So if IAC approves less, what they'll do is they'll issue less because they don't want to get too far ahead in front of spending here. Like I said, the next program is for Pimlico and Laurel Park. The arrangement here is some of the revenues that the racing industry got will be going to the lottery, and instead the lottery then gives them $17 million a year. The advantage for this is that lottery bonds are well known, so it'd be much easier to issue bonds with the lottery revenues than these smaller accounts. Also, it does, as you can see here, they're getting about $527 million and losing $348 million. So it does also allow them to expand and to do more work because they'll be getting more revenues than they otherwise would have as well. There have been some issues lately at the Laurel Park with the track. There were some fatalities for some of the horses. And so it was closed a little bit in December, I believe it was, for about 10 days or so. And the area was resurfaced. I guess the question we have with this is is this going to have any long-term cost implications, or is this problem fixed right now? And how does that affect the funding of these facilities? Also, that is behind schedule, I would like to say. So that we are giving them the $17 million in their account, and so that'll give them a little bit of extra money as well for this. And I guess the last project here that I would mention is the Hagerstown Multi-Use Facility. That is a stadium. Here, it's planned to issue those bonds fairly soon in this year. I have to say I was really surprised at how quickly this project is moving. It is pretty clear to me that the people in Hagerstown were ready to go and had done a lot of work ahead of time. And so it's really, this is one of the fastest I've ever seen a project move like this. So they obviously were well prepared. I will say that. Finally, the last issue I want to bring up has to do with legislation. Here's what I'm showing you here is the sheet that shows all the authorizations for the Stadium Authority. And as you can see down at the bottom there, it's about $4.1 million is what total authorizations are. There's two parts of it, about $400 million, excuse me, 4.1 billion is what it is. 400 million is for what we call state debt and is non-state debt. And that includes the Baltimore City Schools, Built to Learn, and the horse racing and the supplemental facilities. This hasn't been read across yet, these bills, but there are two bills that are going to further add to the Stadium Authority's authorizations if they're enacted. One is $1.2 billion for the Orioles and the Ravens. Each got $600 million, and that is for stadium upgrades. And the idea also here is to get a long-term lease as their leases are about to expire. I think the Orioles expired and they have an additional 2 years through 2023. And the Ravens is through 2028. And the final last program here is a new $200 million program for basically minor league stadiums. Now, when I wrote my analysis. I had an earlier version of the bill. Apparently, I wrote in there that this could do some major league facilities. No, it is only non-major league facilities. So this would only be for minor league facilities. I'm sorry if there's any confusion about that. And that's my presentation, and our recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. I'll take any questions.
Okay, Mr. Trank, thank you for the great analysis. Any questions for our analyst? All right. I don't see any raised hands, so thank you, sir. We'll move along to our agency. We have the chairman of the Maryland Stadium Authority with us, Tom Kelso, and welcome, Tom. Great to see you. And I will let you welcome your team and introduce them as you see fit. Thanks. I think you're on mute there. Mr. Kelso? Mike Friends, are you on?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if you want to take it and start and try and maybe text Mr. Kelso and let him know.
I'll let him know.
I am on. I
okay.
apologize. I had a little technical glitch there.
No worries. Welcome, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. With me today from the Maryland Stadium Authority is our Executive Director, Mike Friends, Senior Vice President for Capital Projects, Gary McGuigan, and our CFO, Dave Wraith, and then Terry Hasseltine, who is the Director of the Maryland Sports Marketing, and that arm of the Maryland Stadium Authority.
Okay. Mr. Friends, do you have any?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Solomon, members of the committee. We're very pleased to be here today to answer your questions. Thank you to Mr. Frank for his insightful analysis. We've included a presentation and written testimony that's included in your materials. However, in the interest of time, we'll just forego going over those. You have a question that Mr. McGuigan, head of our Capital Projects Division, is prepared to answer and amplify, and the rest of us are here to answer any questions. And I don't know if Mr. Kelso wants to say anything else, but if he does, I guess this is the time.
I'm fine. I think we should just go to questions and answers and try to be as expedient as possible with the committee's time.
Terrific.
Okay, I know I have a few questions, but let's see if the committee, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thank you to Mr. Kelso and your team, Delegate Stephanie Smith from the 45th District here in Baltimore City. I just want to first thank you. There's been a lot of school work done, and you guys have been so efficient, and we're just really happy and pleased with the speed of everything and the quality. My question is specifically about the Pimlico project. I know that one of the most important features of that is the pivoting of the track in order to ensure that we can have more room for other non-racing stuff. So I wanted to know kind of a better understanding of when you think there will be some site work initiated.
Gary?
Good afternoon, Gary McGuigan with the Stadium Authority. Right now we're in the early stages of a very complex project with Pimlico and Laurel really tied at the hip because of the daily racing training aspect. And we're still in the program phase and working on the transition of where the Laurel mini horse city will go when we're ready for construction. So I don't have a detailed timeline. I will say the earliest that I see activity at either facility is most likely after the Preakness in 2023. And does that answer your question as best I can?
Yes, I knew you probably couldn't say the day after the Preakness. I know you can't be probably that specific, but just having we know that's kind of the goal timeline, but just wanted to see if anything had been changed from what I've heard. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Novotny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to those joining us today, Mr. Kelso. Just a quick question for you or your team is the proposed legislation coming through this year. Could you go into just a few seconds of detail about how that will support the Stadiums Authority in the future?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and thank you for the question. The bills that we are talking about would provide the capital for reinvestment in the Camden Yards Sports Complex and the two great stadiums that we have. The stadiums are respectively 30 years old and 25 years old and have had some improvements to them, but really no major capital reinvestment in them. So the goal here is multifaceted, but number one is to recognize that we've created over $1 billion of economic value for the state and for Baltimore City since the inception of Camden Yards, with about $670 million of principal and interest paid. So the investments that the state made back in the 1980s and the 1990s have certainly been really strong economic generators for the state and for the city. So we need to continue that. The second is that our stadiums, being as old as they are, happen to be in really good condition structurally. So our goal is to find a way to work with the teams as we go forward, since we don't need to build new stadiums. But what we do need to do is find a way to extend the lives of these stadiums just as far as possible into the future. And so we have developed this concept so that we can work with the teams individually, or we could work with the teams together depending on the projects, and that we can find ways that increase the fan experience, improve the fan experience, draw more people to Camden Yards, create more of a live, work, play environment where the facility is being used far more often than just on game days or concert days. And at the same time, extend the lives of these stadiums so that they are useful and beneficial to the teams as far into the future as possible. And then the last thing, of course, is that when you look at the relationships that we have with the teams, is that they're very strong and no team is putting a gun to our heads. But we have to be realistic that we essentially compete, not today, but into the future, we're competing with other cities because neither league is creating new teams. But there are cities today that are developing and growing and would like to seek these professional teams. And so we feel that the best way to keep the Orioles and the Ravens wedded to Maryland, but in particular to the Camden Yards complex, is to develop a working relationship and a partnership where we're working together all the time on new stadium improvements. And we want the teams not only to want to be here, we want them to feel that one of the strengths of being here is a very unique relationship that this will allow the MSA and by extension the state to have with the teams and the team owners. So, it's a different approach than maybe what people might have been expecting, but we believe it's the right approach to keep the Camden Yards stadiums vital and economically productive, at least where we are today, or hopefully far in advance, and to stimulate some additional capital infusion into the complex and into the surrounding complex that are not state dollars, but private dollars. So, this is the commitment that the state would be making to investments in the facility, but that's not all of the capital that could be invested in the facility, because we would welcome team investment and we would certainly welcome potentially third-party investment there or around the stadium, similar to what's going on south of M&T Bank Stadium now.
And I know this is going to be a departmental bill, piece of legislation that the entire committee is going to be able to look at. And so, we will have an opportunity to ask a lot of questions for the public at large. This isn't, this is sort of the overview of the agency, but we will have an opportunity to consider that bill in a really specific manner when we do have the bill hearing. So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kelso.
Thank you.
Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a quick question. Excited to see that the Stadium Authority is participating in, in the recruitment of trying to get DC and the Baltimore region as part of the FIFA World Cup in 2026. And I just had a quick question. I know the legislature passed a resolution back in 2020 that sort of highlighted, our commitment to the human rights pieces that FIFA itself has laid out, and fair worker pay and worker protections. And I was just curious if that's something that's of mind to you all as the recruitment is going on, just to make sure that we honor the commitments that we've laid out.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yes, we are taking the commitment that was made back in the previous legislative session in a strong consideration. As a matter of fact, that legislation is what was the key component to creating our human rights report that was due to FIFA, that is now posted on the Baltimore MD 2026 website as part of that obligation, and ensuring that not only is human rights, but workers' rights are taken well into consideration, and was a key fabric to the development of that report.
Thank you, Mr. Heseltine. It'll be exciting to lift up our region's soccer heritage and soccer promotion if we're able to get that. Thank you.
We're excited for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions from the committee. Mr. Kelso, let me just congratulate you and your team on the great work you do at the Stadium Authority, and really getting creative and thinking out of the box in a collaborative way with this legislature and the executive, and some of the things we've done in Baltimore City Schools and the Build to Learn, and it really expanding your footprint now into Hagerstown and really statewide. And we look forward to the opportunity to continue that sort of expansion, because we know how great you all do and the good work you do, and Mike Friends and the entire team. So thank you for being with us. We'll look forward to the bill hearing on lots of stuff happening this year.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, really appreciate your time today and your trust in us.
Thank you. All right. We're going to move forward in the agenda. We have University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. Sarah Baker is our analyst.
Okay. Let me just pull up my screen for you. Okay, I'm going to start. The overall allowance increases MSD's budget by $2.9 million to $51.1 million. And as shown in Exhibit 1, expenditures really relate to personnel, which account for 66% of the total spending. Exhibit 2 shows the proposed budget. State funds increased 12.7% or $2.9 million, of which $1.8 million is to restore the BPW reduction in fiscal 21, and $1 million is related to personnel to the general salary increases. Turning to R&D expenditures in Exhibit 3, expenditures have increased from $52.2 million in 2015 to $56 million in 2019, of which state and local government contracts comprise 46% of expenditures. Turning to Exhibit 4, this shows the number of bay restoration projects MSD has participated in, and the number of projects in any given year is primarily dependent on grant funding. So overall, the number of projects has ranged from 214 in 2015 to 175 in 21. And our recommendations to see the USM overview for the system-wide recommendations. And that concludes my presentation.
All right, Ms. Baker, thank you for the great analysis. As always, any questions for our analyst? Don't see any, so let's move forward to the agency. President Dr. Goodwin is with us, and Dr. Goodwin, please feel free to welcome your team and introduce them as you see necessary.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Barnes and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to this hearing to support the operating budget request for the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, or as we're better known, UMSES. I am here with members of my team. We have our Vice President for Administration and Finance, Lynn Wren, and my Chief of Staff, Dave Namazi, with me. You have my written testimony, and I'm just going to highlight a few points. Firstly, I would like to thank the House for your long-term commitment to higher education in Maryland, to the University System of Maryland and UMSES. I would also like to thank Ms. Baker for her always thoughtful and comprehensive analysis. We respectfully request the approval of the Governor's FY23 budget related to UMSES and the University System of Maryland as submitted. UMSES has been at the forefront of environmental stewardship for nearly 100 years, and we remain focused on working with all interested parties on environmental solutions for the unprecedented challenges of the 21st century, particularly related to the recovery of Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to highlight just 3 issues where we are working with our state agencies and multiple stakeholders. Firstly, climate change is having a major impact on Maryland, and we support Maryland's efforts to better understand the changes we are witnessing and developing mitigation and adaptation actions. As just one example of our multiple climate research activities, UMSES developed the first of its kind coastal adaptation report card at the request of the Maryland Coastmark Council and the Department of Natural Resources. This was released last month, and the report assesses the progress being made in Maryland's coastal counties. Oysters continue to be a major focus for us. Oysters help protect shorelines from erosion, improve water quality, and are a critically important part of Chesapeake Bay ecologically, culturally, and economically. UMSES partners with the Department of Natural Resources and NOAA to develop the science to inform management actions. And the Horn Point Oyster Hatchery produces a variety of oysters for use in oyster research, oyster restoration, aquaculture, and educational projects. Over the past decade, the hatchery has deployed about 1 billion oyster spat each year to the waters of the Chesapeake. And finally, I wanted to mention workforce development. At UMSES, we train the next generation of environmental scientists, business leaders, policymakers, natural resource managers, and educators. And at UMSES, we are committed to ensuring that the face of the future environmental workforce reflects the face of Maryland and the underserved communities that are often the most impacted by their environments. Examples of our work includes the Seas Alliance, supported by the National Science Foundation, and the Lower Living Marine Resources Cooperative Science Center, which we conduct in partnership with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon, and I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for your great work there at UMSES. Are there any questions for the agency? Doing such a great job, there are no questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Solomon, and the committee. We
You're doing
appreciate
great work.
the support.
Please keep it up, and we'll see you back soon. All right, let's move forward with MSD Early Child Development. Ann Wagner is our analyst. Ms. Wagner, welcome.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. I will also take a minute to share my screen. All right. And I'm off mute, just wanted to check. So to start us off on the MSD Early Childhood Development Analysis, this first chart shows that the largest budget change in fiscal 23 is due to one-time COVID-19 federal funds ending. And then I'll jump ahead to Exhibit 1 on page 4. This begins the performance analysis section. This exhibit shows MSDE's annual measure on the number of licensed childcare slots. Most recently, you'll see that the number of licensed slots decreased by almost 5% in fiscal 21. This is the largest reduction over the period as the pandemic has worsened a lot of operational challenges for childcare providers. And so that includes workforce shortages and increased operating costs. This chart doesn't show the breakout between childcare centers and family childcare providers, but MSDE has indicated in the past that most closures have affected family childcare providers. And in a November presentation to the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families, MSD also indicated that from January 2020 to November 21, 81% of statewide program closures were among family childcare providers. So it is affecting them at higher rates. So then moving on to the budget discussion, in fiscal 22, I'll focus on the significant amount of one-time federal funding that was authorized in the American Rescue Plan Act. Specifically for childcare and for improving the state's early childhood systems. So of this award, Maryland received $502 million overall that is split into two uses. $309 million is able to be used for stabilization grants to childcare providers. And then $193 million is allowed for more flexible funding. That's awarded as a supplemental grant to the state's existing childcare and development block grant. So then first, to discuss the stabilization grants, the uses of these grants are listed on page 5. It's mainly for personnel and operating costs. And so after accounting for the funding that can be from this $309 million that can be used on administration, the department is distributing $286 million in federal funds over 2 application cycles. For the first cycle, MSDE had originally intended to get $158 million out by September 30th, but they faced a slight delay in hiring the contractual staff that would process these applications. And so instead, the funds were dispersed on a rolling basis throughout October of 2021. The second application cycle just closed on January 23rd. And so MSD is processing applications now and has been processing them on a rolling basis. But they expect to award the remaining $128 million in ARPA funds by March 4th. So then in addition to the federal funding for stabilization grants, there's also a proposed deficiency that would add $50 million in general funds, and that's for additional stabilization grants in fiscal 22. Based on the governor's announcement about this funding, the uses appear pretty similar to the current use of the federal award, but MSD is asked to discuss whether any new uses will be included in the $50 million general fund grants, as well as the timeline for distributing those. There is also a DLS recommendation to adopt committee narrative that would request the department to submit a report on total stabilization grant awards and include a discussion of how the providers are using these grants. So then returning to the other piece of the ARPA funding, MSDE's spending plan for the $193 million is shown on page 7, going on to page 8. I will highlight one item on this list, which is $21.8 million that's budgeted to expand a major IT project. This project originally would have replaced the child care administration tracking system, but because of the availability of this one-time federal funding, the program's actually been expanded. So it is replacing the child care administration tracking system, but it will also add on a few other early childhood data systems. There is an appendix that goes into more detail about this major IT project, but I did want to highlight that as there is another DLS recommendation for narrative requesting a report on how this project has been redesigned. So then moving on to the fiscal 23 allowance, kind of jumping ahead to the exhibit on page 12. So the main budget discussion relates to early childhood initiatives funded as part of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And so in fiscal 23, this is the first full year of implementation for the legislation. This exhibit compares the funding levels in the fiscal 23 allowance to what was projected at the time the Chapter 36 fiscal note came out. And so I've split it up here by a couple different categories of spending. For example, the supportive and intervention services bars shown in gray. That's funding to expand Judy centers and expand family support centers that are now referred to as PATI centers, and then also increased funding for the infants and toddlers program. And so you can, there's an appendix at the back of this analysis that goes into more detail about each specific program. But overall, most of the mandated funding levels are budgeted in fiscal 23. The biggest difference is funding for the publicly funded full day pre-kindergarten formula. You can see that in the blue bars, as the allowance includes about $68 million above what was projected in the fiscal note for the blueprint bill. And so I'll take a moment to describe. So under Chapter 36, the fiscal 23 new formula for funding publicly funded full day pre-kindergarten would have provided a certain per pupil amount for children from families with incomes at 300% of the federal poverty line or lower that were enrolled in a full day public pre-K program. So these children would have been considered tier 1, and the full per pupil award would be covered with a state and a local share of that amount. However, due to implementation issues with local school systems not being able to designate where children are up to that 300% federal poverty line and lower, the budget instead funds the total enrollment for full day pre-kindergarten in public schools. And so this is actually kind of similar to the grant program for publicly funded pre-K that was in effect before this formula took effect. With the supplemental grants, there was a certain per pupil amount that was calculated for all of the four-year-old students enrolled in public pre-K, or excuse me, full day pre-K. And so in fiscal 23, as kind of a transition year, this is extended. And so all this count of enrollment, including all children in public pre-K, continues. And so you can see this on Exhibit 5. Here I've shown the fiscal 23 projected funding and the projected enrollment, but then the fiscal 23 allowance actually funds higher than the mandated level and funds more students, as students above that tier 1 income level are also included in this count and receive state funding for the entire per pupil amount. And then I'll kind of go back to at the bottom of page 13, there were a few other implementation issues or just considerations that MSD is still working through. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that there are other implementation decisions that are still in the works as this pre-kindergarten formula is being implemented. One of those things is the phase-in schedule, because Chapter 36, as part of the phase-in, would have required that MSD implement a sliding scale to begin providing a portion of that per pupil amount for children from families with incomes between 300% and 600% of the federal poverty level. And so that's would be called tier 2. And so those students would also receive some state and local funding, but on a sliding scale of how much they would receive. And so because this first year, all students enrolled in public pre-K are being counted, that means the tier 2 students and tier 3 students are receiving the same per pupil funding award from the state as tier 1 students. So then I'll jump ahead. There is an information request for the department. We ask that they discuss local school systems' ability to collect income data or tiered income data for students in their public pre-K programs starting next year for the fiscal 24 formula calculation. We also ask them to describe whether the formula methodology will return to what was outlined in the bill in fiscal 24 and then beyond that, and then include a timeline for when that return to the phase-in schedule in the statute will happen. So then, and the other thing that we've asked MSD to discuss is just how the state's discretionary enhancement, this $68 million in funding they're providing on top of the mandated level, will affect the local share of pre-K funding and how that local share will be calculated. So then turning to the personnel section, the allowance shows a decline of 25 contractual positions, and those were mainly funded with one-time American Rescue Plan Act funding in fiscal 23, in fiscal 22. So the department is asked to discuss whether they have adequate contractual staffing levels, as there is that proposed deficiency that adds $50 million in state funding to award more stabilization grants. So there's just a question there about the level of contractual positions to administer those grants. So then there is one issue in this analysis for you today, and that relates to the Child Care Scholarship Program. I'll start with Exhibit 6 on page 18. This shows recent trends in the Child Care Scholarship Program enrollment. It also highlights a few programmatic changes that have happened over the past few years and have affected enrollment. Those are shown with these labels and arrows. For example, at the start of fiscal 20 and 21, the reimbursement rates that are paid to providers have been raised to the 30th and 60th percentiles, respectively. And so I wanted to show on this enrollment chart that childcare scholarship enrollment was, prior to the pandemic, was increasing rather rapidly. So this line here shows year-over-year growth. And you can see that after income eligibility was expanded in August of 2018, this this enrollment growth had stayed in the double digits for at least through February of 2020. And then of course, with March 2020 and the pandemic, you're starting to see that enrollment in the Child Care Scholarship Program decrease very rapidly. And most recently, since November 2020, the year-over-year change in this program has actually shown double-digit declines in enrollment. And so this change in enrollment due to the pandemic is happening at the same time that the fiscal 22 budget actually grows substantially for this program. There's $81 million in one-time ARPA funding that was allocated. And so the use of this funding, MSD had described that they were planning on increasing the provider reimbursement rates from the 60th percentile to the 70th percentile of market rates. And then the other programmatic change is expanding income eligibility from about the 65% of the state median income to 75% of the state median income. When this funding was allocated to the fiscal 22 budget, that was how the described uses of that funding. And then there is also in fiscal 23 another expansion for the funding using general funds though this time. So in fiscal 23, the allowance reflects $10 million in new general funds supporting this program. Again, at the same time that you're seeing declines in enrollment. And then the other thing I'll say about the programmatic changes, including expanding income eligibility and then increasing the reimbursement rates, is that those haven't taken effect yet. And so there is some questions in the analysis for the department to explain how much of this fiscal 22 federal funding is the department actually expecting to spend, and then whether the programmatic changes would be retroactive to any specific date. And then there is also a question to the department as well as its vendor for data analysis and research for this program to just describe the cost estimates and enrollment projections on once they do expand income eligibility and then increase provider reimbursement rates. There is also a DLS recommendation here, and that is to add budget language restricting that $10 million in general funds in fiscal 23 until MSD provides a report on their actual fiscal 22 federal fund spending, and then the projected cost moving forward of those programmatic changes. The last DLS recommendation is also on the Child Care Scholarship Program. It requests quarterly reports on enrollment expenditures and then implementation of any waiting lists or reimbursement rate increases, and then that expanded eligibility. But with that, I'll conclude the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner, for the great, thorough presentation as always. Any questions for our analyst? Okay, let's move to our agency. I think we're joined by our superintendent, who is our new superintendent, although hardly seems new at this point, having jumped right into the fire. But I do think this is the first time you were with us, so welcome and congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I have a few members of my team with me. I do like to travel with a posse, just, never like to be by myself. So they are with me today. I have Krishna Talor, who's my Deputy Soup of Operation, Donna Gunning, who has been with the department for a very long time, doing all of our policy and fiscal analysis when it comes to the impact on various laws and bills financially. Justin Dayhoff, who is our new Assistant Superintendent of Planning, Operations, and Financial Strategy. I have Ari Americana, who's my Chief of Staff, Dr. Deanne Collins, who's my Deputy Soup of Teaching and Learning, and then you guys know Stephen Hicks, who's our Assistant Soup over our Division of Early Childhood Education. So they will help me answer any follow-up questions, but I do thank you for giving me the floor. So I'd like to start out with some opening remarks. So again, good afternoon, Chairman Barnes, Chairman Solomon, and members of the subcommittee. I'm grateful to you for your continued commitment to early childhood education. Thank you, Ms. Wagner, for your thoughtful analysis. I'm pleased to be here today in service of our pre-K and childcare communities. Maryland's childcare providers and early childhood educators, like their counterparts across the nation, struggled prior to the pandemic and have suffered throughout the pandemic, but remain the backbone to Maryland's recovery. This community helped ensure Marylanders could and can get back to work. This community worked diligently to ensure our youngest learners could still prepare for kindergarten and the early years of K-12 instruction. This community continues to provide service to Maryland children and families, even stepping in when families may not yet be able to afford payments due to job loss or deferred pay because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We must continue to prioritize and support our childcare and early childhood education communities. My department is currently rolling out more than $120 million in stabilization grants to support providers so they can support parents and young children. The fiscal year 2023 proposed budget includes an additional $50 million in stabilization funding. My department will work with providers to ensure these funds are allocated to meet their current and future needs so they can continue to support families and children. All of this comes at a time where the Blueprint for Maryland's Future reimagines the way Maryland administers, monitors, and supports childcare and early childhood education. New credential requirements and the expansion of private provider opportunities and family preference mean we are now raising the bar for quality childcare and early childhood education. And at the same time, we need to increase access to the elevated early childhood experience for more children and families. MSD is excited to lead the charge forward with the implementation of the blueprint, and our capacity to do so is tied to the budgetary and funding provisions contemplated in law and in the fiscal year 2023 budget bill. To that end, I will respond to the analysis. The analysis attends to three core themes, to which I will respond in turn: the implementation of child care stabilization grants, the blueprint implementation of publicly funded pre-K programs, and the expansion of the child care scholarship program. I have openly said, and I will reiterate here again today, that I am and I will continue to be the biggest critic of our work and the biggest advocate for our improvement. We need to acknowledge what we do, good and bad, so that we can constantly improve. MSD values, respects, and supports our childcare provider community, critical partners in early childhood care and education. Understanding that the Federal American Rescue Plan funds could not be released into the hands of our providers fast enough, MSD sought to be one of the first in the country to release the stabilization grants and implemented an aggressive schedule to meet this goal. And we were within days of meeting our preliminary target. The process MSD relied on for the first round of stabilization grants required new contractual positions to process applications and payments. MSD did not receive the appropriation for those positions until August. MSD acknowledged, however, that the department could have done a better job of anticipating the supplemental appropriation from the moment the state became aware of the program to better build a timely plan and process. Federal guidance for stabilization funds recommend the disbursement of at least half of the funds by January 1st, 2022, which MSD completed through its round one application window that concluded in fall 2021. In total, MSDE distributed more than $158 million to 5,206 providers in that round. MSD opened the second application window earlier than originally planned with a more streamlined application process relative to the first funding round. To implement an expedited plan, MSD moved up the grant window to January and sought feedback from the childcare community, including the Maryland State Child Care Association and the Maryland State Family Child Care Association, and for input to make the to gather input to make the application and application process easier and more accessible to the state's diverse range of providers. I began upon my arrival at the department to strive for continuous improvement. I repurposed existing position vacancies at the department to create core service functions to better serve the department and its stakeholders. As part of that effort, I created a new Office of Grants Administration and Compliance. The office revisited the grant application and proactively issued grant guidance and documentation to support the childcare community through the application process. We systematized fiscal processes and created efficiencies within the finance team and our accounting processes. And we pre-checked provider information in MSD's accounting systems to ensure MSDE can quickly process payment for potential awardees. MSD provided 6 live customer support sessions to help providers through all aspects of the grant application process. MSD hoped these sessions would increase the number of providers who applied for the grants, reduce errors or issues in grant applications, and decrease grant processing times. As a result, MSD received more than 6,000 applications for round 2 payments. That's 1,000 more providers than we awarded in the first round. We didn't change eligibility. We worked diligently to provide excellent customer service, respond to the needs of the provider community, and make the program accessible. Now we have already processed more than $59 million in payments for more than 3,000 providers this round, and we remain on track to meet our target date for payment issuance to all awarded applicants. Again, MSD did this work without new positions, but through the repurposing of existing vacancies in the department. As to the next round of proposed stabilization grants that are in the allowance as a $50 million deficiency, MSD is prepared to distribute the $50 million in fiscal year 2022 general funds for additional stabilization grants once the legislature approves the deficiency appropriation in spring 2022. MSD will elicit stakeholder input regarding the allowable uses of the new state funds in preparation for releasing the application in spring 2022. Future funding of child care stabilization grants is dependent on state and/or federal funding. I now turn to the blueprint for Maryland Future. As the analysis notes, the proposed budget includes enhanced funding for pre-K. The enhancement in fiscal year 2023 is tied largely to the proxy data required to calculate the pre-K state aid formula. Tier 1 eligibility calculation requires local school systems to identify families at poverty levels above what it normally identified. Local school systems are adept at identifying eligibility for free and reduced price lunch, which is 185% of the federal poverty level, but not at the tier 1 level, which is 300% of the federal poverty level. To avoid undercounting students, the proposed budget reflects the count of all full-day pre-K enrolled children, as well as children enrolled in the community programs participating in the pre-K expansion grant program. As Maryland continues to expand voluntary and publicly funded pre-K, and as noted in our pre-kindergarten implementation planning report, MSD will work to develop and utilize a single application form and process for families to complete for early education and comprehensive services programs. This model streamlines the process for families so they can use one form and process for providing proof of documentation of income and assets, and can then find out the services for which they are eligible. Income verification for current pre-K programs occurs at the local level through program providers. Practices are consistent across both public providers, public schools, and private providers, community-based programs. Providers may use free and reduced meal program eligibility or direct certification documentation. MSD anticipates the formula methodology outlined in Chapter 36 will return in fiscal year 2024. MSD will ensure that local school systems are aware of the formula methodology outlined in Chapter 36, and that in fiscal year 2024, the state share of the pre-K program will support Tier 1 students only. The fiscal year 2023 enhancement does not impact the local share of the public pre-K program. The local share is calculated based on the formula in statute. Lastly, I want to address the expansion of the Child Care Scholarship Program and the role of the American Rescue Plan funds in that effort. MSD will increase access to the Child Care Scholarship Program via two mechanisms: increasing the reimbursement rate and increasing eligibility. MSD will utilize American Rescue Plan funds to increase the income eligibility to families to 75% of the state median income, and to increase provider reimbursement rate to the 70th percentile of market rates. The change in rates will be in place in the last quarter of fiscal year 2022. MSD also requested projected cost increases from RESI at Towson University for increasing the eligibility threshold to 75% of state median income. RESI's projected cost in fiscal year 2022 is $6.7 million. RESI's projected additional cost for fiscal year 23 is $20.8 million. And then REGI's projected increased cost for increasing the provider reimbursement rate to the 70th percentile of market rates in fiscal year 2022 is $9.6 million. And finally, RESI's projected additional cost for fiscal year 2023 is $31.2 million. The increased costs in fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023 will be paid with the American Rescue Plan Child Care Development Block Grant funds. In sum, we today are in a moment of transformation. MSDE is ready to lead Maryland forward, to implement the once-in-a-generation blueprint for Maryland's future, and to do so hand in hand with the communities we serve. There's no time to wait. We will do so with urgency and in full recognition of the power and potential of this moment. Again, I appreciate the collaborative relationship with the General Assembly. I extend our thanks once more to Ms. Wagner for her excellent analysis. And with that, I will take any and all questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Superintendent, thank you for the thorough response to the analyst questions. Are there questions up? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Superintendent, thank you for being here. And I wanted to just extend my my appreciation and my gratitude to your whole team who have been really just great partners to work with, particularly your new chief of staff and Mr. Hicks, who have the relationship has definitely taken a turn for the better. As you know, childcare is a big priority for our speaker, and your team has worked really collaboratively with us to try to get some of the legislation that we're working on correct. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that. And really, I think through particularly the fall, as we've tried to roll out a lot of these different programs and work with the community, it's just been a really great partnership. And I just wanted you to know how much I appreciated that. I did have a couple of questions. Was glad of the 70 versus 75% clarification, because actually there was a typo in the response. So I'm glad that it is 75% of state median income and 70% of provider rates. I think that's going to be a huge improvement. I did want to ask just first on the ARPA grant piece. Appreciated or I guess should specify on the stabilization piece. I think it's great that you all have streamlined the process and gotten it out. But was just curious if there's any thoughts. There were a couple more sort of parameters put on round 2. But is there any thought for round 3, assuming the $50 million in deficiency appropriation is approved, on making sure that that's going towards areas where, maybe there has been an increase in closure, in looking at where the grants went out? Not necessarily unhappy that Montgomery County got a large chunk, but I know, Prince George's in particular saw the largest closure. So are we thinking anything of sort of targeted stabilization grants to areas that have been particularly hard hit?
Justin, do you want to address that, since I have you hanging out with our Child Care Association groups to get their feedback regularly on their thoughts and such?
Sure. So I think the quickest answer is we are going to be working with the childcare community to set those expectations for this round, right? It's kind of a unique opportunity in that the first 2 rounds obviously were constrained by the restrictions associated with the federal law and the components thereof. This opens that up a little bit, right? And so our plan is to build upon what we've done, which again is in the second round to have met with the stakeholders to do that work. We constructed a more targeted funding formula in the stabilization grant for round 2 in order to address that. So from factors like, for example, using the Social Vulnerability Index, which is a CDC measure associated with disaster recovery. It's comprised of 14 different components ranging from income, home language, all of those pieces. So we provided extra per licensed slot funding for any providers who had a high social vulnerability index. We also provided extra licensed slot amounts for providers who were serving infants, right? Who were serving toddlers, providers who were enrolling and invoicing for children who are a part of the Child Care Scholarship Program, sort of a proxy there for providers who are open and who are serving our children who need that extra support. We will, though, to the superintendent's point, continue that effort, given potential flexibility that we have here to be continuously striving for improvement and feedback as we head into the third round.
Great. And then one of the other questions I had, I guess, maybe Mr. Superintendent, I don't know if this is specifically for you or other folks on your team. You and I had a conversation earlier in the year about some of the frustrations, and you mentioned it in your testimony, of sort of staffing situation within the department. And I think it's been great that you've been able to repurpose some of the pins. But one of the concerns that I hear a lot is that the child care scholarship process is just really slow moving, and often it's difficult to get people on the phone. If you're a parent and you have questions, you're a provider and you're trying to work through the application. And so I was just sort of curious. I didn't see any new pins in the budget for next year. Are there plans to potentially repurpose staff into a more public-facing role, or what's a long-term plan? Because I think we're very enthusiastic to make sure that you have the staffing you need to run these programs efficiently and appropriately, but just want to make sure we know what you need.
Absolutely. I'll put it this way. So I'm not going to wait for pins. Can I use pins to to provide even better customer service out of the department? Absolutely. And I hope to get them over time to implement the blueprint and sustain that. But with what I have existing, with the great people who I inherited when I arrived, coupled with the new people I brought on, we will do great things and we will get this right. The team has already started making improvements to the process, and I'll have Stephen share what some of those immediate improvements have been. We literally have a bi-weekly meeting with me that is just focused on customer service and how to make that better for our families. And the childcare scholarship application process is one of those. And so, Stephen, do you want to share some of those things, as well as the navigators that will be coming live too as well this spring and going forward? Go ahead, Stephen.
Sure. Thank you, Superintendent Chaudhry, and thank you for that question, Delegate Solomon, and your support for early childhood. Some of the efforts that we've been doing begin with meeting with the associations, like Maryland State Child Care Association, the Maryland State Family Child Care Association, SEIU, and hearing directly from providers to find out what those challenges are and addressing specific concerns and issues. Some of the things that through those conversations we've been able to do is streamlining the redetermination application. So we issue a scholarship for 1 year to the family, and it's valid for that entire 12 months. And then afterwards, they need to submit a redetermination form to make sure that they are still eligible with their qualifying event, their work, or going to school, and also income based on their family level. And what we're going to do is extend that from 12 months to 24 months to relieve the burden on families to have to keep applying every 12 months. We think that will help with both the families and also efficiencies using childcare central to our vendor to process applications. We're also giving families an additional 30 days to resubmit their application missing materials. So a family submits an application for child care scholarship. Sometimes information is not legible, sometimes information is missing. And then our vendor contacts the parent and asks for missing materials. And then that parent has to supply those materials. Traditionally, as most states do, they provide a 30-day window for that. From the time the original application is submitted, we know that our families are facing tremendous hardship and challenges during this period, especially of the pandemic. So we've extended it to an additional 30 days. So essentially they have 60 days to get all of their application materials in order, so they don't have to restart the entire process at the end of 30 days. We're also training family navigators or family resource personnel that will be placed at regional centers across the state. These would be working to prevent errors from the beginning on an application so that a family would understand completely what is required to apply for a scholarship and at the front end, instead of having to fix it at the back end. We think this will get the scholarship in the hands of parents faster, which is really ultimately our goal. Support working parents and ensure that children get the early childhood services they need. We also created a video to help parents understand step by step the application process and what documents are needed by federal government and also COMAR to apply for a scholarship. That video is now posted on our website. We're going to create another video that will also provide instructions for providers on how to appropriately submit an invoice so that that does not get rejected as well. In the future, we plan to have direct email communication to our parents on any missing documents and also any errors in the vouchers to providers so that those corrections can be made immediately. The family support personnel will be an ongoing effort that we will use and monitor and look for ways in which we can improve that process from our customers if there are any deficiencies. We also plan to provide these services in multiple languages so we can support parents on all of their needs. We also are, as you know, finishing up the completion of our family portal and our provider portal. We think these will add additional efficiencies, and we plan to have that in operation before the end of this fiscal year.
The last thing I'll just add is I will not roll out this portal if it's not tested with our families. And so I want to run a lot of focus groups to make sure it's easy to navigate. You can have a fancy portal. It can not mean anything. This work is personal to me as a former Head Start child, as family members, mom and dad had to navigate government forms, SNAP, TANF, right? There's a time tax on people from disadvantaged backgrounds because of government bureaucratic process that we put them through. So whatever I can do to cut down these processes, collect the essential forms, I will do. This is personal, and trust me, we will figure this out. So if you have other ideas, other states that are doing it better, then let me know. My team knows that. I will constantly be telling them, I don't want to find out someone else is doing it better than I am. So you got to let me know who those are. And so we will make sure we get this right. I assure you.
Well, I really appreciate that. And as I said, Ari and I had a great conversation about one of the bills that we're working on that we'll be introducing later this session. And, I would love to see, Mr. Hicks, at some point, some of the metric data I know we've had a conversation about before, and maybe some of the stats on applications that are rejected, what families are not able to get enrolled. And I think, we'd love to see a place where, you can pick up the phone, you're going to get somebody to help you walk through the application. And I think the legislation we're working on will really simplify that. The last question that I have, and Mr. Chair, I appreciate your indulgence on this, is just sort of a broader question. I think many of us really appreciate the goals of raising the reimbursement rates and getting us, to cover a higher threshold of family income. But I guess sort of more broadly, and maybe you can follow up with the data on this, I'm still sort of unsure of what is the universe of families that we're trying to cover here. We saw a drop off of about 10,000 kids, obviously, with the pandemic. We know we've seen about 1,000 providers close, and a lot of the legislation that we're working on is going to hopefully address those issues. But I guess what do we need to get to full capacity? What's our ultimate goal of affordability? I know Maryland Family Network has done a lot of good work on that, but where do we want to be in maybe 4 or 5 years? Of how many families do we need to cover? What's the supply of providers that we really need to see our state reach? To make sure we're covering every child. And like I said, maybe that's a longer term conversation as we sift through the numbers and figure out where we are after the pandemic. But just something I wanted to bring up.
Justin or Stephen, if you have anything to address, let me know. Our goal is to try to get to universal pre-K at the state level as much as possible, right? Every family is covered, especially those who need it, not at our just lowest income level, but as well as our middle class families as well. So that's the goal in this mixed delivery system. And our report that we provided at the late fall as part of the blueprint requirements, we talked about what kinds of things we need to consider as we implement this vision. But if there's anything else you want to add, Stephen or Justin, let me know that I did not mention.
Well, I would just add, thank you, you're absolutely right. And I would just add that beyond universal pre-K, making sure that every 3- and 4-year-old gets an opportunity to attend high quality early childhood education programs in a mixed delivery system, maximizing parental choice so they can go to a school. Children can be seen in a family child care home. They could be seen in a child care center, a faith-based setting, et cetera, private school. We also would like to continue to expand opportunities for universal childcare. So that is the ultimate goal, but I think your questions are very good. What is the scope of families that would be eligible, the number of children that are in need of childcare or quality pre-K, and how many providers do we have, and what is our goal to go? As you just mentioned, from the time before the pandemic to now, we lost 25% of our children and families in the Child Care Scholarship Program, about 5,000 families. We know, looking at longitudinal data, that at one time Maryland had 25,000 children in the scholarship program. Now we have 15. I don't think we have less of a need now. I think the access has not been as wide. And so we're working both on access to quality programs across the state and focusing on areas in which there are childcare deserts, and using these ARPA funds and additional federal funds and state funds. We will be incentivizing and encouraging the expansion of these opportunities that families and children need.
Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and your whole team. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Delegate Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and your team for being here today. It's clear that you're anxious or working to adapt processes to meet the needs of the families you serve. And that was no more evident than what my colleague, Delegate Solomon, pointed out, adapting and streamlining the process for the stabilization grants. You saw there were flaws, you went in and you tried to fix it. And I really appreciate that. Will you please speak on the child care administration tracking system, the replacement that you're doing there? What systems are being changed and how are they going to work together? How do you envision them working together in the end?
I think you're muted, Superintendent.
There you go. I'll start and then I'll have Stephen jump in. And so this is an area that keeps me up at night. Our data systems are not as sophisticated as they need to be. There are other states that are ahead on this when it comes to having modernized systems related to being able to track everything from licensing and workforce development, as well as obviously data on students who are in the system itself. And so right now we are in this process, right, to basically modernize our childcare infrastructure. It's a massive, massive project. And I'll have Stephen share where we are currently with that. But I will be the first to say we're not where we need to be. And so we have started the process to begin mapping out what we need. The RFP is obviously out there. We've looked to states who are ahead of us, like Colorado and other places when it comes to this data. And so, Stephen, do you want to provide some detailed updates on where we exactly stand as of today?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Superintendent Chaudhry. So 2 weeks ago, our TORF was posted. Earlier this week, we had over 80 persons attend in the bidders conference to ask questions, to find out information about this competition. This is to replace our current early childhood data system, which is quite antiquated. There have been many great efforts prior to me coming to the department to use Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge funds, for example, to fix the system, to improve it. I think that's been a moderately successful, but we still have many issues. And our goal is to have a more comprehensive data system. So currently, the data system that we have is used primarily for licensing inspections, for the Child Care Scholarship Program, for Maryland Excels, and for our workforce advancement program supporting the workforce. The modernization of the program, of the system, will include our other programs, such as the Judy Center, Early Learning Centers, hopefully information on the Patty Centers, Universal Pre-K and that expansion, and more sophisticated data, especially demographic data, on our early childhood workforce. We have this data system right now that connects to other vendors to support, for example, the Child Care Scholarship Program, the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment data collection, Maryland Excels, infant early childhood mental health. What we want to do is have a system that is really comprehensive in-house that can provide the kind of data where we can make improvements immediately and find out at any time where there are areas for that. We also want to have the data system accessible to our customers. So in a way in which parents, stakeholders, legislators, members of the public can see how Maryland is advancing early childhood education and learning opportunities in our state. Oh, I think that's it, unless there's any other questions beside on the data.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm interested to follow the development of that site.
All right, thanks, Delegate. Great questions from this great subcommittee today. Mr. Superintendent, if I can just move off topic just a little bit. I know we're talking about early childhood development today, and I'm really pleased that the blueprint money was all funded in early childhood development, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, and we probably will be bringing up every time we talk about education until it gets fixed this session, the fact that $120 million of the blueprint was left out for 2 jurisdictions that have the highest concentrations of poverty in the state. It's a tragic and an unbelievable thing that has happened. I just wanted to see what your thoughts on that were and how they're going to cope with that, how they're going to deal with that.
I think so. It's something I recently shared when I presented to Chair Pinsky's committee about this. So long term, the blueprint has to be funded adequately, fully, in order for everything to stick and sustain itself. I think in the short term, the federal infusion of funds coupled with the state set aside that I'm also going to push back down to the because I don't need it to add more fat into the department, that I'm going to push down based on need and depth of poverty and such across our school systems is enough to kickstart all of the blueprint work. Absolutely, it is enough. I will say that with confidence, and our superintendents definitely can meet that challenge with what they have. However, 2024 will come, and it will and we will have all of these investments that we've made that has helped kickstart things, right? Such as even in our childcare work, but it has to be fully funded. So if it is not fully funded after that, then we have problems, right? The whole idea and the amazing part of the blueprint is it actually did an adequacy study. What does it cost to provide a world-class education? And what is the difference between a child growing up in Baltimore City in concentrated poverty versus a child growing up in say Clarksville in Howard County? There's major differences. It costs more. And so that is set, and that needs to be fully funded. But I believe right now it's not going to hold us back to kickstart the right things. And so and I don't agree with that premise, but I do believe that we do need to fill the funding going forward.
We're proud of our superintendents, and certainly we know that they've done a lot. They're able to do a lot. They've done a lot with limited resources, and they work hard. And all of our public school officials to provide great education on sometimes limited resources, but $120 million is not chump change. It's significant. And as much as it means this year, setting precedent of underfunding the blueprint in the first year of the blueprint, right? In the very first year, we have now precedent where a governor has come in and not funded it. So if the concern is this year, okay, I have those concerns. If you don't share those concerns, then I hope that we could at least share the concerns of the precedent that it sets, that a governor could come in and cut the blueprint for really given no reason whatsoever. So I hope we can at least be on the same page.
No, we're on the same page on that. The reason why I'm also not fully worried right now is because this department also has a set aside, right, that exceeds the 133 million that I'm going to push down to our school systems, right? And it's going to be actually adjusted according to need and depth of poverty and everything. And that is much more than the 133 million as part of its ESSER round, the multiple rounds that happened. The department always had a set aside, and there was always supposed to be a plan for that set aside. So while the plan for that set aside now is to push it down to be able to help push out the blueprint work, and which exceeds the 133 million.
That is good to hear that you're making a plan to accommodate for this serious shortcoming. And I'm glad that you have a plan. I think we should all be thinking about a plan to come up with how we're going to deal with this shortfall that the governor's left us. I think Delegate Smith has a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also thank you, Superintendent Chaudhry. It's nice to see you again in your grandeur with your full team. We met at the elementary school.
Yes,
so
we
nice
did.
to see you. And I just wanted to follow up on the chair's remarks. Obviously, the $125 million was a mandate. You being such an elegant and big-hearted leader that you are going to figure out how to accommodate a governor not funding a mandate. That's one thing. you shouldn't really have to. Like you said, you hadn't yet conceived a plan for those funds. They were set aside, but they weren't set aside to accommodate negligence, incompetence, or malice towards the proper funding of these two jurisdictions. So again, thank you for being you and caring about our students. But I definitely think you shouldn't be put in a position to have to accommodate that decision to omit the funds. But thank you for who you are and your team and everything that you do for our young people.
I thank you very much. And, you know, Baltimore City and places, those are the only districts I grew up in and worked in. And so that's what I know. And, you know, and Dr. Santelises, you know, I know is ready to figure this out, but you're right, shouldn't have to. But at the same time, we will not wait to do great things for our kids. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And, you know, just for the public watching, just to be clear, our ire is not directed at our great superintendent. You know, he didn't short the funding, the governor did. And hearing that you're going to take action to accommodate that and try to backfill that as best you can gives us some solace. We appreciate and are proud of you and the work that you're doing, and happy to have you on board. So with that, thank you for being with us, and we look forward. We'll see you I know very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Be
you.
safe and healthy.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to my favorite hearing of the year, Maryland Public Broadcasting. I always look forward to this one. They provide such a great service for our state, and it's just a fun hearing. Mr. Quist is our analyst, Samuel Quist.
Mr. Chair, I believe there was someone from the public signed up to testify.
Yes, and I see her waiting patiently right there, Laurel Wheeldryer. I'm sorry, Laura, welcome.
No problem at all. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, honorable members. Good afternoon. I'm Laura Wheeldryer, Executive Director of the Maryland Family Network, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in favor of the FY23 budget for MSD's Division of Early Childhood. You have my written testimony, and that was a great discussion, so I'm going to be brief. The budget this year is a good news story, certainly in part due to large infusions of federal aid through ARPA and state investments tied to the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And this is welcome news because it means expanded opportunities for young children and their families after, I think we all know, a very challenging couple of years. The administration and the General Assembly are to be commended for your sustained investment in early childhood. MFN is urging support of the proposed budget, but we are also deeply concerned about the sustainability of current spending levels, especially to the extent that they are supported by time-limited federal dollars through the American Rescue Plan Act, among other sources. This issue has been well covered in the excellent analysis provided by Ann Wagner. In absence of additional funding, Maryland families could face a dramatic decline in vital services in the out years. Our concerns stand particularly, but not solely, with regard to the Child Care Scholarship Program, which has already been discussed quite a bit today. So much progress has been made since your leadership during the 2018 session that we're always on guard to make sure there's no backsliding. Maryland now ranks among the top 10 states in the child care assistance we provide to low-income families. The money behind Child Care Scholarship is our biggest public investment in childcare. And childcare has become such a priority over the last couple of years as a critical systemic support for families and for our state economy, as well as for the healthy development of young children. And the decrease in enrollment in the scholarship program, right as the state is making a tremendous investment in this program, is cause for some concern and attention. I know you and your colleagues will consider other legislation this year to strengthen child care scholarship and support child care providers, and we're looking forward to that discussion. So in conclusion, my two headlines for you today, again, reflected in your own DLS analysis, are: when families are in such crisis, why are fewer of them using child care scholarship, and what can be done to increase enrollment and expand awareness? We need data and analysis about these decreases and forecasting about what we can expect as Maryland rebounds from COVID with investments of this size and scope. And second, how do we remain vigilant and committed to the funding increases we see in this year's budget and ensure that families and providers don't experience financial whiplash when ARPA funds are expended? We ask the General Assembly to redouble its vigilance on child care scholarships fiscal standing, and wherever possible to enhance MSD's efforts to extend the benefits of high quality programs to more young children, families, and early childhood educators. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your testimony and being with us and waiting patiently. Are there any
My pleasure.
questions? Any questions for our witness? Okay, well, thanks for
Mr.
being
Chair,
with us. Yes, Delegate Solomon.
I just wanted to thank Maryland Family Network. They've been great partners in a lot of the work that we've done, and particularly the affordability report, as we were talking on. Just really appreciate all the data and help that you give us to try to figure this stuff out.
You're very welcome.
You're a great partner, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I think we can turn to Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission, and we do have Samuel Quist with us, our analyst. Welcome, Mr. Quist.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, I'll be presenting the DLS analysis for the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission. On your screen, you should be seeing the budget analysis document. The fiscal 23 allowance totals $32.8 million. This is about a 6.5% decrease from the fiscal 22 working appropriation. And this decrease is due to reimbursable fund spending in the previous year. There was a budget amendment from the Maryland State Department of Education for about $3.9 million that was processed. This was a grant fund to provide funds for the production of online course development. There's also a budget amendment that's been processed from the Maryland Department of Health for $1.9 million for some television production. However, due to the timing of the processing of that amendment, that data is not included in this analysis. Moving on to the overview of the agency spending in fiscal 23, as you can see, a little over half of the budget covers personnel expenses, 51%. The other, just under half of the budget, covers the various operating expenses for Maryland Public Television. There's about 24% for various television production contracts and broadcasting contracts, and another 13% for PBS and other dues, subscriptions, and licenses. Exhibit 2, this chart exhibits the main changes in the budget and the 23 allowance. Again, the largest change is the reimbursable fund decrease for the MSD grant. As far as increases, the personnel expenses increased by a total of about $782,000. And the main component of this is the implementation of a new salary plan. There was also a few changes related to some equipment purchases and other miscellaneous items. Turning to the personnel overview summary, the fiscal 23 allowance contains funding for 145 regular positions, as well as 12.7 contractual full-time equivalents. This number remains the same, except there's an additional 0.5 contractual position. And the analysis notes that the end of the year, calendar 21, data showed about 16 vacant positions, which is about 9.6 positions above the turnover expectancy. And the budget data appears that there is adequate funding to fill these positions. Moving to the key observations section, there are 3 performance measures of the agency's annual Managing for Results submission that are highlighted in the analysis. Exhibit number 3 shows the total number of Maryland Public Television members and member contributions. And the chart is showing that the number of both have increased over the past 2 consecutive fiscal years. I think despite some concern initially that membership contributions might decline due to some of the economic uncertainties and negative impacts caused by the pandemics. However, as you see on the chart, the opposite occurred and both membership and member contributions increased. The next chart, Exhibit 4, this presents the number of original programs produced each year, which, as you can see, that number declined the past 2 years, and this was due to some interruptions and impacts caused by the pandemic. However, MPT has indicated that they have taken steps to adapt to some of these challenges, and they're working on additional programming in the present year. The final chart is on viewership. These are the viewership ratings as estimated by the Nielsen TV rating agency. In fiscal 21, there were approximately 1.6 million viewers, and this number has increased the past 2 fiscal years. And there's been some evidence presented by Nielsen and some other agencies that one of the more interesting impacts of the pandemic is that television viewership as a whole has increased as more people are staying home and exploring different entertainment options. So if there's few positive impacts of the pandemic, this could be one of those. Finally, the analysis DLS is recommending to concur with the governor's allowance. And that concludes the DLS presentation. I can take any questions from the committee if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Quist. Thank you for the analysis. Are there any questions for the analyst? I don't see any, so let's move to our agency. I think we have Larry Unger with us today.
He is.
There you are. Hey, sir. Great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for this time to speak about the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission. And frankly, for all the support that the legislature has provided over many years. And of course, thank you to our fine analyst, Mr. Quist. With me today is MPT Station Manager, Stephen Stupak, as well as our CFO, Suzanne Schwertman, and our Head of Human Resources, Colette Coakley. Now, I know how busy you all are, so I'm going to be quite brief. I would like to mention, though, that our 2 national documentaries, one on Harriet Tubman and one on Frederick Douglass, are now complete. We'll begin screenings around the state very soon, and the programs will air nationally on PBS this fall. We are very proud of these films, and once again, thank the legislature for supporting that. As usual, we have prepared a video describing what MPT has accomplished in the past year, and with a bit of luck, I'll be able to play that for you now.
Always look forward to the video, Larry.
Oh, how do I go back?
Stop share screen real quick.
Okay, sorry, take me just a second here.
You have as much time as you need.
I got it. We're quite a technical organization, but that may not include me.
"2021 was a year of extraordinary change. From a pandemic that has changed nearly every aspect of our daily lives to a social justice movement that aims to challenge long-standing bias. But one thing that hasn't changed is our mission to serve our community as a dependable source of news and critical information, as a classroom helper and trusted confidant, as neighbor and advocate. Because our stories are your stories."
MPT brings you the best of broadcast through 4 outstanding channels. Seamless streaming, live and on demand with MPT Passport, and made-for-mobile content that uplifts and inspires viewers from our 6-state viewing audience and beyond. In concert with our robust social media presence, MPT is committed to keeping residents informed and engaged, at home, online, and everywhere in between.
Bringing home 7 local Emmy Awards in 2021, MPT consistently delivers insightful, high-quality programs, including local news and public affairs with Direct Connection and State Circle, now celebrating 40 years of up-close and in-depth coverage of the state legislature.
Tonight, we will hear from the legislature's presiding officers.
We explore arts and culture with time-honored mainstays, including Ways to Pay for College, Maryland Farm and Harvest, Outdoors Maryland, and Artworks, which partnered with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in June to honor the BSO's legendary maestro with Marin Alsop, a live gala celebration.
And new last fall, MPT presented the Maryland 5-Star at Fair Hill, harnessing Marylanders' enthusiasm for a popular state pastime. We studied the nuts and bolts of the manufacturing industry with Made in Maryland and journeyed to some of the state's most pristine natural resources with Destination Maryland.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into the MPT Sports Desk.
The MPT Sports Desk cheered on Bowie State against rivals Virginia State University, and will cover the CIAA men's and women's basketball tournament in Baltimore this February.
It's going to have a tremendous impact on the state of Maryland and the entire region.
In addition to our local programming, viewers across the country enjoy national favorites such as My Greek Table, To Dine For with Kate Sullivan, Motor Week, and Stephen Reitland's Project Fire.
We dig into environmental issues with our highly popular Chesapeake Bay Week and delve into social issues with HBCU Week, which celebrates the hard-earned achievements of historically Black colleges and universities and examines the role of HBCUs in the broader social justice movement.
At Maryland Public Television, we're dedicated to providing dialogue and content that causes us to think critically, causes us to probe our better selves, and to come out of our comfort zone to discuss some very difficult topics with the goal of being unified at the very end.
As part of a larger initiative, HBCU Week and Standing Against Racism were designed to address social justice reform with stimulating programs and documentaries, thoughtful interviews, and lively online debate with residents and community leaders through Conversations for Change.
It's never been more important to hear from communities that are often marginalized, that no one wants to hear from them. And you play a vital role in getting their voices heard.
MPT's Digital Studios goes below the surface to explore a wide range of topics with web-exclusive interviews from The Dig. And our high-powered advertising agency helps Maryland state agencies spread the word about critical issues, such as rent assistance, addiction, and COVID, on nearly every media platform throughout the state.
To learn more, visit rentrelief.maryland.gov. The ongoing public health crisis meant the continuation of our educational program, At Home Learning, and a new initiative, Your Digital Backpack, which provides critical hands-on resources for remote learners and educators alike. In collaboration with our acclaimed online education portal, ThinkPort, and Ready to Learn, our youngest viewers were able to take advantage of comprehensive multimedia assets and common learning tools throughout the pandemic school year.
We found learning loss was a huge issue, and public television was very uniquely set to help fill the void there. It was greatly appreciated from parents all over the state, including myself and my wife.
Through crisis and calm, celebration and social change, our goal to inform, entertain, and inspire never changes, because our stories are your stories. And now, enjoy the best of primetime PBS.
You haven't seen anything yet.
This is what it's all about.
Oh my goodness.
MPT. Be informed, be entertained, be inspired.
Well, I hope you'll all agree that tells the story way better than I could have ever done. Again, I want to thank you for your support and your time, and I'd be happy to try and respond to any questions you might have.
Thanks, Larry. The video always gets me excited, and good move featuring our speaker this year. That'll pretty much guarantee your budget. So that's
Well, she's been a big supporter since I've been here, and as I look around, I think I've been here longer than anybody on the screen.
She was the chair of this subcommittee when I joined the committee, and was always a huge supporter of Maryland Public Television, and so I think she passed it on to me.
We're grateful for that.
So we're very happy with the work you're doing. And any questions from the committee? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo your sentiments, and I am a PBS kid, so I always love having you all here. Stephen, I really appreciate the time you took to talk with me about some of the stuff you're working on. And Larry, I just wanted to say I really love the sort of Maryland ad agency piece. I think you all did just a tremendous job, particularly on the census stuff. I know that was something feels like years ago when we were still in person, but in 2020, you all, I think, picked up the ball tremendously from the Department of Planning, who dropped it and really put together just incredible work that many of us use with our constituents and in our communities to make sure we got what we needed in the census. And I was just thinking about it. I mean, is there anything more that we could potentially do to make sure that, other state agencies are coming to you all first before, they try to sign contracts with, other organizations outside of the state? I think we would love to, kind of keep the circle of not only funding your work, but obviously the ecosystem of MPT and the great work that you've been doing, seeing that continue as opposed to having those contracts go elsewhere.
Well, thank you so much for those comments. And obviously, we've been delighted with the ad agency. It seems like a win-win for the state, for the agencies, for ourselves. The one thing that I have to tell you, I just hated was hearing that there was money in the state that had to be returned to the federal government. It just, it hurt my heart. And I believe we've been able to help in that. I think the only thing left, we would love it if we, most of the way we've gotten this business is just word of mouth from one agency head to the next. We really have done almost no marketing to this point. But if the legislature could somehow let the other agencies know, with only one caution, we can do some more. But I don't want to get too far out there to where we can't deliver the same type of service that everybody's been happy with. I think Stephen probably told you, I think this year it's going to be probably in excess of $7 million. And when you're a $30 or $35 million agency, that's a big portion. And we love doing the work. That's kind of the skill set that's here. And by the way, if I haven't mentioned it, Stephen has been carrying the ball on the ad agency, and he's just done a miraculous job. And if you think it's easy keeping all those agencies happy and getting these things out on time, Stephen had a full head of hair when he came here. So, it's just been fantastic. And thank you for mentioning it. And, and it helps us too. So it's just a true win-win situation.
Thank you, Larry. And really looking forward to seeing the two big documentaries later this fall. So
I think you'll be
thanks
pleased.
for everything you all do.
And Delegate Solomon, you're not a PBS kid anymore. You're a PBS dad. Leo needs to check out Wildcrats and Nature Cat, So any other questions for Larry and his team? All right. Well, thank you so much for the work you do, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye now.
With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, subcommittee.